the news. I'm Sui. The 2023 spring meetings of the World Bank Group and the International Monetary Fund have commenced in Washington. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva says over 40 countries have expressed interest in borrowing from the fund's new Resilience and Sustainability Trust. John Terry brings more details about the meetings.
These meetings at a very complex time for the global economic agenda. Now, the key to these meetings is fairly ambitious reform and also fundraising for various projects that they want to do around the world. But of course, the meeting is always overshadowed by something. In the last couple of years, it's been COVID, for example. Well, now, of course, it's inflation, it's Ukraine. In the last couple of weeks, it's the banking worries as well, particularly with the regional banks here in America, but the fear that this will somehow spread to banks around the world. Now, Kristalina Georgieva, who's the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, says the global growth is now historically weak, and indeed the forecast for 2023 is 3% or below, and that's the lowest forecast that we've had since the 1990s. So that's going back, what, 40 years, something like that. She says 90% of all the advanced economic nations in the world are now slowing down, and interestingly enough, India and China are two countries that are pointed out as being responsible for pretty much half all the global growth in the coming 12 months.
Iran and Saudi Arabia will exchange ambassadors after the reopening of their diplomatic missions. Iranian Foreign Ministry says the Saudi team has already arrived in Iran to lay the groundwork for reopening their embassy in Tehran and consulate in Mashhad. The ministry also says the Iranian delegation will soon travel to Saudi Arabia for the same purpose. The resumption of diplomatic relations follows the signing of a joint statement by the two countries' foreign ministers in Beijing last week. The deal also includes plans for economic cooperation and meetings between joint economic commissions. U.S. President Joe Biden has said he plans on running for re-election in 2024. He made remarks during an interview at the White House before the annual Easter egg roll on the South Lawn. Ukrainian authorities say 100 Ukrainian captives, including 20 women, have been released in the latest prisoner swap with Russia. Among those free are Ukrainian army soldiers, National Guards, Navy servicemen, and border guards. However, the Ukrainian president's office gives no details on the number of Russian troops released by Ukraine under the swap deal. Separately, the coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war says Ukraine has handed over to Russia 5 severely wounded soldiers in line with the Geneva Conventions. Since March 2022, more than 2,000 Ukrainians have been free as a result of prisoner exchanges with Russia. U.S. officials are trying to determine the damage caused by a widespread intelligence breach. The Justice Department is investigating after a large cache of Pentagon documents went online. Nick Hopper reports.
It's still not clear exactly who leaked dozens of highly classified files online, but what is clear is the diplomatic fallout and the embarrassing conversations that those files have prompted. Among the documents is material showing the Ukrainian military's vulnerabilities, in particular in areas of dwindling supplies and weakened air defences. Ukraine has reportedly altered its battle plans in light of the leak, the document's appearance coming ahead of the country's possible spring counter-offensive. The files also reveal the depth of US intelligence when it comes to Russian tactics. The revelations also show the extent to which the US is eavesdropping on allies, including Ukraine, South Korea and Israel.
South Korea's main opposition party has urged the government to provide details on alleged U.S. eavesdropping activities in the country. Local media quotes a Democratic Party leader as saying such a move is unacceptable if the allegation is true. The leader has called on the National Assembly to see to the matter immediately. The Palestinian Health Ministry says Israeli forces killed a Palestinian boy in the occupied West Bank on Monday. The 15-year-old is reported to have been shot during a military raid. The Israeli military said its forces operated in a refugee camp near Jericho to apprehend Palestinians suspected in involvement in attacks against Israelis. And that's the news. I'm Sui.
Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today. China's first domestically built aircraft carrier joins a Pilaolei military drill in the Taiwan Straits and around Taiwan Island for the first time. U.S. government officials scramble to identify source of highly classified intel leak. Saudi Arabia and Houthi officials advance talks over long-term ceasefire. You're listening to World Today, a news program with a different perspective. I'm Liu Kun in Beijing. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, download our podcast by searching World Today. China's first domestically built aircraft carrier, the Shandong, has joined the People's Liberation Army Eastern Theater Command in a military drill in the Taiwan Straits and around Taiwan Island for the first time. As the drill enters its third and final day of operations on Monday, the Pilaolei held simultaneous organized patrols and advances and simulated strikes against the key targets on the island and in its surrounding waters. The Pilaolei announced the combat readiness patrols and joint sword exercises on Saturday. Wu Bin reports from Pingtan in Fujian province.
I'm now at a seaside on Pingtan Island, East China's Fujian province, and behind me is the Taiwan Strait. For day 3 of the military drills, today's operation focused on testing the ability of joint reconnaissance, joint command, joint operations, and a joint security support under the joint warfare system. And also, they say that all the soldiers of the Eastern Theater Command will use their firm will, strong capability, and confidence to safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity and safeguard peace and well-being of both sides of the strait. From 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. today, a live-fire drill is conducting near Pingtan Island in the northern, in the waters north of the Pingtan Island. That's according to Pingtan Maritime Safety Administration. So this is not part of the military exercises, and authorities warn that all ships are forbidden to enter the areas during the live-fire drills. And now to recap a little bit about the first 2 days of the military drills. The first day focused on seizing the right to control the sea, air, and the communication channels under the joint warfare system and the shaping what it calls a deterrence posture around the Taiwan Island. The second day focused on what Beijing calls simulated precision strikes that target Taiwan Island and the surrounding waters.
That was Wu Bin reporting on the Pilaolei Eastern Theater Command's drills in the Taiwan Straits around the Taiwan Island. Now, for more, we're joined by Liu Kuangyu, researcher at the Institute of Taiwan Studies, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Thank you, Dr. Liu, for joining us again.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening indeed. Now, first up, what are the purposes of the drill?
We can say that the second round of their circumnavigation exercises, the PLA is focusing on testing its ability to seize maritime, air, and information power under the support of a joint combat system. And the task forces simultaneously organized the circumnavigation of the Taiwan Islands to shape an all-direction and deterrent situation on the encircled island. First, we consider from the previous firepower around the island to the exercise. This time, the troops around the island, the firepower simulation on the island, and the PLA's preparation for an actual combat against Taiwan is the Taiwan independence is so-called is gradually deepening. We can see the PLA is continue to strengthen joint strike exercises against Taiwan at close range, and through the refinement of warfare and tactics. This continued to hone a series of specific capabilities needed to support joint command, mission planning, long-range maneuver, and seizure power, etc. And these capabilities have accumulated and leaped from quantity to quality. Third, we have also mentioned that the official statements includes the key targets of Taiwan as the targets of strikes, which is unprecedented. So in the release, we can see that the PLA's various military branches is carrying out simulated strikes against targets on the island. We can see the wording precise and critical, suggests that these targets could be important military facilities or so-called Taiwan independence political size. This indicates the PLA's preparation for natural combat is moving towards actual cases, places, and persons. and this undoubtedly to a blunt warning deterrence to the Taiwan independent separatist forces.
Now, we earlier mentioned in the report that this is the first time China's first domestically built aircraft carrier, the Shandong, joining the drill. So what's special about that, and how does it, how does the aircraft carrier joining the drill contribute to the security stability in the Taiwan Straits and around the waters?
We can see the Shandong aircraft carrier formation has now moved to the Taiwan island, and the participating forces from the west, north, east, and south of the island are forming an encircle poster. So first, we can see that the Shandong carrier strike group have fully, or to some extent, fully formed operational capabilities. After all, the ship would not undertake such important exercise and training mission if it is not completed full training, it's not yet combat capacity. In particular, this kind of exercise in the direction of Taiwan Strait and the east of Taiwan is the most important test. It's impossible to let a ship that has not formed combat effectiveness participate in this exercise. And therefore, the Shandong aircraft carrier participating in this drill, it can be considered a sign of its military power formation. And second, the joint exercise is also a major test for the Shandong aircraft carrier strike group, taking on such an important exercise and training test as soon as the combat effectiveness is formed and comprehensively testing the tactical role that an aircraft carrier can play under the Chinese Naval and Air Force joint campaign system. It can be seen that the Chinese military has very high expectations for the Shandong carrier, and of course, it is great trust in it. We believe that our first domestically built carrier will be able to fulfill this mission successfully, complete all tasks in this joint exercise, and bring it successful in the cycle of generating combat effectiveness in the excellent results. And so, one last thing is that we can see that we can predict the Shandong carrier can carry out a task on blocking foreign enemies, foreign interference from the eastwards. But also can be deployed in the east of Taiwan Island and the PLA across the attack cluster to form a two-pronged attack on the Taiwanese forces by intercepting the strategic delivery of extraterritorial forces to the eastern part of Taiwan's main island at a critical moment.
Now, let's review. Things are unfolding rather rapidly over the past few days regarding, the situation surrounding Taiwan. Now, after concluding his trip to the Chinese mainland and upon arriving in Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou, former chairman of the Chinese Kuomintang Party, said, adherence to the 1992 consensus best serves the interest of the Taiwan people. He also said current leaders of Taiwan continue to, quote-unquote, lead Taiwan to danger, and, quote-unquote, the future is a choice between peace or war. So how alarming is that, and what do you make of his statements?
Yes, I would like to provide a little context here. We know that the 1992 consensus is the political foundation for cross-strait relations. We all know that regarding such a major principle, we know that the blue and green political camps in Taiwan on Taiwan Islands have different attitudes. We know that green camp has never recognized or admitted the 1992 consensus and has been stigmatizing on it. In the beginning, the blue camp has adhered to the 1992 consensus, but later its stance was somewhat relaxed and wavering. So some blue camp politicians took the 1992 consensus out of context and even tried to replace it with new so-called political ideas. But generally speaking, the blue camp still accepts 1992 consensus. So what Ma Ying-jeou's attitude towards the consensus, that is what relevant parties and people on both sides of China, the Taiwan Straits are paying close attention to. So we can see during his trip, Ma Ying-jeou, Mr. Ma, has in many ways expressed his commitment to the 1992 consensus and his recognition of the core implications of the consensus. As the chairman of Kuomintang and the leader of Taiwan previously, Mr. Ma has promoted cross-strait interactions on the basis of 1992 consensus. And we can see the recent poll on the island show that around half of the people agreed on the 1992 consensus as the basis for cross-strait exchanges and dialogue, which is higher than those who disagreed. So, and this is an example of what Ma Ying-jeou called the 1992 consensus coming back to life.
Well, Ma Ying-jeou, follow up on that. Ma Ying-jeou said,
Yes.
because the current Taiwan leaders continue to lead Taiwan toward danger, the future is a choice for between peace or war. What do you make of that? How alarming is it? What messages is he trying to send to the current leaders of Taiwan?
Well, that's actually it's very direct and simple. Warning sign. That means because we consider with 1992 consensus we have a peaceful development period during the past decades between the Chinese mainland and Taiwan, and now without recognition of the 1992 consensus by the DPP authorities on Taiwan, we can see that the Taiwan Strait is in huge storm and danger. So that is a sharp contrast between past and present, and I believe that Mr. Mali has been wise enough to send this message to the people of Taiwan to choose a brighter future.
Right. Well, one more question, Doctor.
Yes.
So, almost at the same time, Taiwan leader Tsai Ing-wen returned to Taiwan as well after meeting with U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in California. So how do you view the damages brought by this meeting, especially its impact on the security situation over the Taiwan Straits?
This damage can be a long time, can be very synthetic, but I like to name some of them. The first is to undermine the legal and political foundation for cross-strait peace. We know that both sides of Taiwan Straits belong to one China is not only an objective historical fact, but it's also internationally organized legal fact. So one China is not only the foundation for peaceful development of cross-strait relations, but also the cornerstone for the steady and long-term growth of China-U.S. relations for the peace of the strait, perpetual peace. So Taiwan's meeting with the number 3 U.S. figure is meaningless and undermines the principle. And second, by meeting with McCarthy and Kevin Gallagher, Mike Gallagher, Tsai has completely trampled on and betrayed the dignity and security of the people on the island.
Right.
You can see McCarthy was the standard bearer of the hawkish anti-China politicians in the United States. He single-handedly led establishment of the so-called special committee, selected committee on U.S.-China strategy competition in the House of Representatives, and appointed Mike Gallagher, who was also an anti-China spearhead as chairman to comprehensively stir up the so-called new McCarthyism in the anti-communist, anti-China resistance. So as for Gallagher, we know that he publicly advocated the establishment of so-called U.S.-Taiwan Joint Defense Command and proposed the House version of the Armed Taiwan Act, which aims to turn Taiwan into a so-called hedgehog island against the mainland, and depleting its military power to the other side and turning Taiwan into another battlefield of so-called Ukraine. So in addition, this, we can say that the Strategic Competition Commission, led by Gallagher, is making Taiwan a tool for U.S. hegemony to intervene on both sides of Taiwan Strait. So this is fundamental source of the new Taiwan Strait crisis, and Taiwan invites the so-called wolf into the house. We can say last year,
Well, certainly, this is one of the most important issues, not only in U.S.-China bilateral relations, but perhaps of our world today. But thank you for joining us. That was Dr. Liu Kuangyu, researcher at the Institute of Taiwan Studies, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. After the break, we take a look at the latest with recent intel leaks in the U.S. government. This is World Today. Stay with us.
Hello, my name is Alessandro Colombier Teixeira. I'm a professor of public policy and management at Tsinghua University in Beijing. I am a great listener of The World Today. In my opinion, The World Today is one of the best China radio programs. In the world today, we can get the best news and analysis in what is happening now in the world. So please, come to join us.
Welcome back. You're listening to World Today. I'm Liu Kun in Beijing. U.S. officials are scrambling to identify source of a widespread intelligence leak and to determine the damage. U.S. Department of Justice has launched an investigation after a large cache of documents revealing details ranging from Ukraine's defense readiness to U.S. spying over its allies went online. Benji Heyer has more.
By what do these leaks consist of? A series of classified documents which were printed, photographed and then uploaded to a gaming chat platform, Discord, in late February and early March. Went largely under the radar until they garnered further traction and attention when a portion of them were posted on a separate online platform, 4chan. What we know is that several of them contain high-level, top-secret pieces of information, including on China and the militaries of Ukraine and Russia. At the moment, we don't know who is responsible. The official who has details regarding the source of this link says that the person to blame could be anyone, and most concerning to the US, hundreds if not thousands of people could have cast their eyes on those files since they were posted online. The repercussions for the individual responsible for the leak could be detrimental too. An investigation is ongoing amongst the Pentagon chiefs who have already lowered the amount of sensitive information that is being shared. There are also countries with close ties to the US mentioned in these files. Israel, South Korea and France. We've already had a response from each of those governments. One official from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office in Israel says that it firmly rejects a claim that the Israeli foreign intelligence agencies were urging its own employees and citizens to take to the streets. South Korea, too, saying it will have necessary consultations with the US side after leaked documents suggested US officials had spied on allies in Seoul, and France denying that there had been any French soldiers in Ukraine, given that was too one of the claims as part of those leaked classified files.
That was Benji Heyer reporting. Now, for more on this, we're joined by Tony Kevin. He is former Australian ambassador to Poland and Cambodia, also author of the book Return to Moscow. Thank you, Ambassador. It's good to have you back on the show again.
It's good to be on the show again. Thank you.
Now, Ambassador, military intel leaks, we know, in the U.S. government are not a new thing. But how do you evaluate the scope and scale of this round of leaks?
Well, we don't know enough yet about the source. And thanks for that very good briefing we've just been listening to, which exposes the uncertainties, I think. I had initially hoped that it might be an anti-war whistleblower within the United States defense system on the model of Daniel Ellsberg during the Vietnam War, or indeed Chelsea Manning during the Iraq invasion. And I still hope that such a person might be the original source, because a lot of the material supports the case that Ukraine, the Kiev regime, is losing the war and cannot recover. And none of it supports a case that Kiev might win. Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who I attach a lot of value to, the quality of his reporting, he says that there are people in the Pentagon and in the US Defense Forces who know the truth about the war but cannot say so. So one of them might have been the beginning of this. But there's evidence that the material has been tampered with. The original website source Discord cannot be found now, which is very suspicious. And the fact that it went through the New York Times is very suspicious, because the New York Times has a terrible reputation now for basically acting as a stenographer to the U.S. administration. Take, for example, their, the way they behaved over Seymour Hersh story about the Nord Stream explosion. They continued to ignore Seymour Hersh as if it hadn't been written. Right. They continue to put out ridiculous stories about Ukrainian yachts and so on. So they're not a source to be trusted. Now, Russian bloggers, and I I follow the Russian bloggers' websites as much as I can.
Mm-hmm.
They're very doubtful about the truth of the material, and they're contemptuous of it. And they say, well, the United States is just up to tricks again. But Peskov in the Kremlin is very cautious, and he says, well, we're studying it. He hasn't taken a position on it yet. So I really don't know. The short answer.
Well, then, Ambassador, upon reading about these reports and also, part of the leaks, what interested you the most and why?
Well, I've already mentioned several things. Firstly, it interests me that the New York Times is involved, and that worries me. Secondly, I'm pleased about the open admission that Ukraine's not doing well, and maybe that does support in a roundabout way, that this is a way the United States might be trying to wind down its involvement in support of Kiev, and that would be a good thing, because Kiev won't make peace until they know that the United States is not supporting them anymore. So that's a good thing. And finally, the reports that Kiev is disturbed by the leaked material and have complained about it to the Americans. I think Zelensky's complained. To me, that's a good thing too. So it's a mixture of good and bad.
Now, as our reporter talked about earlier, these leaks show U.S. has been spying on friends and foes alike, which is something we already knew. But for example, these materials contained information on conversations that the U.S. had intercepted within allied governments, Israel, South Korea, and so on. How do you think, this will affect U.S.'s ability to work with allies in the near future? Because, it will be running in the news for quite some time.
Yeah. Well, none of this is new. I mean, it's well known that the U.S. spies on allies, and there's the famous reporting of Angela Merkel, her phone being tapped by the Americans. So I don't think anybody's particularly surprised by this. I don't think that it will really be important in this regard.
But then South Korea's presidential office already said, it would demand the U.S. take appropriate actions regarding, these reports of U.S. spying on South Korea's top security officials. If the details of the matter are confirmed, how do you think, do you think these U.S. allied governments are really posturing?
I think South Korea is being very brave, and I commend them for their robust position. I wish Germany and France would be equally robust. There's no sign of it. I must say they're both very, very compliant in accepting whatever the U.S. does to them.
Now, also, Ambassador, how do you assess, the U.S. experts are saying that these materials are causing damage to our national interest, but, international observers are saying that this is causing reputation damage to the U.S. How do you view that?
Well, it's a bit early to say. I don't think it's necessarily doing damage to the national interest. If it contributes to the United States withdrawing from Ukraine, I think that would be very much in the U.S. national interest, because...
But they don't say that like that.
Well, no, they don't think so, not the present Biden administration, but there are plenty of people on the Republican side who think that the U.S. is going down the wrong road in Ukraine, particularly now. And so that, to me, that national interest argument is not terribly convincing. I could go back to what I said originally, that I hoped, that, and I still do hope in a way, that this might be some kind of a signal to the Biden administration that there are a lot of people in the U.S. who are not happy, and I mean in the U.S. Defense Department and in the Pentagon and in the Army.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador. We're running out of time, but thank you for joining us to talk about this. That was Tony Kevin, former Australian ambassador to Poland and Cambodia. You're listening to World Today. We'll be right back after a break.
chief economist of Hang Seng Bank, China. The World Today is a real fun program. You will hear interesting people discussing global trend, economic event, what's happening in and outside of China. So, friends around the world, hope you can join us.
Welcome. I'm Elaf Elad, economics professor and member of the Data Science and AI Center at New York University, Shanghai. On the World Today program, you can find in-depth and impartial insight, as well as critical commentary on key trends in the Chinese economy, financial technology, business, and blockchain. To prepare for the world tomorrow, join me on World Today.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Liu Kun in Beijing. Saudi and Omani delegations have met with Houthi officials in Yemen's capital Sana'a. The visit is seen as progress in the Oman-mediated consultations between Riyadh and Sana'a, running in parallel to UN peace efforts. Both sides will negotiate the lifting of the Saudi-led blockade on Yemeni ports, ending hostilities and setting a timeline for foreign forces to exit the country. The peace initiatives have gained momentum after Saudi Arabia and Iran agreed to re-establish ties in a deal brokered by China. Now, for more on this, we're joined by Professor Greg Barton. He's Professor of Global Islamic Politics at Deakin University in Australia. Thank you, Professor Barton, for joining us again.
Thank you. Good to be back with you.
Now, Professor, so what's the role of, first thing first, I'm very interested in this. What's the role of Oman in these peace talks between Saudi and Houthis? Because earlier we heard reports that Oman was critical in bringing peace between Saudi and Iran too.
Yeah, Oman is an unusual country in the Middle East. It's on that southeastern tip of the peninsula, so just south of Saudi and just to the east of Oman. And it's always had peaceful relations with both Saudi and Yemen. So Yemen on its west and Saudi on its north. The form of Islam practiced in Oman is unusual. It's a kind of Shia Islam, so it has some links with Iran, but it's its own distinct variety. But that also means it's in a position to engage with its neighbors in Yemen, particularly the Houthis. So it's seen as a good faith negotiator, as a non-threatening regional power, and it's an honest broker. That's the way it's been seen. It's been trying to broker peace talks with this war in Yemen since the war broke out in 2015.
Right.
Obviously, it hasn't been successful up until now, but this recent rapprochement between Iran and Saudi, which Oman has sort of helped facilitate along with China, now gives a sense of optimism that we really will move forward. And all parties are tired in this conflict, and it's been it's killed hundreds of thousands of people, and 80% of the population of Yemen is dependent on aid. 90% doesn't have access to electricity grid. It's a terrible humanitarian disaster. So you can understand that neighbouring Oman really wants to see things move forward.
Now, you mentioned the recent restored relations between Saudi and Iran. I mean, how instrumental was that, for the Saudis and the Houthis to really advance talks in Yemen this time?
Well, the Saudis see the Houthis as being backed by Iran, and they see this as a proxy conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia played through Yemen. So the Iranians backing the Houthis, who are another form of Shia Islam, follow another form of Shia Islam, and even though the relationship is complicated, and certainly Saudi Arabia and Iran have been engaged in proxy open conflict and sort of cold conflict across the entire Middle East, this particular war in Yemen, which Saudi weighed into, backing the south and fighting against the Houthis, ended up much worse for the Saudis and for the UAE as well than they thought. They've had little success, and it's been an embarrassment and a drain on their resources, of course a tragedy for the people of Yemen. So taking the proxy conflict element out, the backing of Saudi Arabia and Iran potentially out of this conflict, doesn't make a very complex civil war in Yemen go away, but it begins to make it more possible.
Now, Professor, so we are talking about some of the details of an eventual ceasefire, for example, lifting of the blockades on Yemeni ports and also setting a timeline for foreign forces to exit the country. Also, there are reports about Saudi supporting public aid. So what issues do you think will be key points in your observation?
Well, one of the things is can Humpty Dumpty's egg be put back together again? And that adage suggests that it can't. But Yemen was a divided country. It came together. It's now been split by the civil war. It's split north-south with the Houthis controlling the north. One of the things that's worried negotiators in Oman is that they're not been involved in the direct Saudi Houthi negotiations. So I think the worry is that Saudi Arabia is so keen to get out of this conflict that it might just leave Yemen divided. To be fair, the Saudis don't have the power to put it together again. So that's the big unknown about this peace talk. As I said, taking away the proxy conflict aspect makes it possible to begin to end a really horrible civil war, but it still remains a complex civil war.
But that's not a bad start to begin with, right?
No, it's the best start we've had since this war began. So I mean, it's not nothing. It's a big deal.
Now, Professor, how do you look at the timeline here? I mean, how long do we have to wait for, an eventual peace?
You get the impression, particularly with the recent peace talk brokering in China between Saudi Arabia and Iran, that those major powers are keen for things to develop very quickly. Now, whether that happens or not, of course, it remains to be seen. If their forces or their proxies come under fire, that might slow things down. But there is the hope that over the next few months we'll see access to those seaports opened up again and a sort of a beginning of recovery with the Yemeni economy, at least sort of the ability to move goods in and out and people to move in and out and building of confidence. That should be happening this year if this peace talks are going to work. But there's a lot that could make that go wrong.
Well, let's just, pray things will play out safely and also smoothly. Now, Professor, we have been reporting about the rapid development in the Middle East politics for the past few weeks, especially, the recent restored relations between Iran and Saudi, and also several government officials of several Arab countries meeting, Syrian leaders, talking about Syria possibly returning to the Arab League. So how do you view the background of these rapid developments, and how do you see a future let's say landscape in terms of the situation in the Middle East?
Well, as ever with the Middle East, there are grounds for optimism with these developments, and these peace talks are to be welcomed, and these potentially developments can change the whole calculus of powers and conflict in the region. But there's a lot that can be problematic. I mean, welcoming Syria back in under the Assad regime, it's distasteful for a lot of people given the brutal nature of the way that the Assad regime has treated so many of its citizens. But it also, in a very practical sense, means that Syrian refugees abroad, whether they're in Turkey close by or whether they're in Europe, could be under pressure to go back to Syria. And many of them say that they have concerns that if they go back to Syria, not only will they face difficult economic circumstances, but they could be arrested and disappear as many of their relatives have, which is the reason many give for fleeing Syria in the first place. So that's a big concern. And of course, the role that Iran plays both in Syria and in Iraq is a critical factor in what happens with those two countries. So if Iran can see a basis for lowering the temperature in its proxy conflict with Saudi Arabia and sort of, if for its own reasons, move on, and Saudi Arabia also helps dial down the temperature, that would be great. Of course, the temperature in Israel and the West Bank has gone up over the last few weeks, particularly this Holy Week, and that's another factor that reminds us of how important Iran is and the role that it plays. So complicated region, and things are never going to be simple, but we are seeing some really big potential breakthroughs. I mean, each side has its own sort of transactional calculus. I'm not saying everyone is suddenly persuaded by the cause of peace, But if they get into the habit of living with their neighbours and they get into the habit of not being at war, that habit can hold and good things can happen.
Well, indeed. I mean, the role of the current government, the Assad government in Syria, is indeed controversial, and people may have different opinions other than, what you just mentioned, but that'll be the topic of another time. But thank you, Professor. We're running out of time. That was Professor Greg Barton, Professor of Global Islamic Politics at Deakin University in Australia. This is World Today. We'll be right back.
Hello, I am Dr. Digby James Wren, a political analyst and international relations scholar specializing in China area studies. World Today offers unmatched in-depth perspectives on China's politics, economics, business, technology and society. World Today's team of reporters and contributors provides valuable information from all of the world's major economies. I hope you can join me on World Today for the very best insights and news from China, on China, and help to build a better understanding of China's role in the world today.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Liu Kun in Beijing. The third International Consumer Products Expo has kicked off in Hainan province in southern China. It's the first major national level exhibition after China updated its COVID-19 response last year. Tang Bo reports from Haikou.
Compared with previous years, the third China International Consumer Products Expo will see a larger exhibition area and more exhibitors and buyers.
This year's expo brings together more international and domestic high-quality consumer goods resources. With more than 3,100 brands from over 60 countries and regions participating. Among them, more than 300 brands will debut their new products. The scale of the expo, the level of internationalization, and the impact of the brands will be further enhanced.
The government work report from this year's two sessions highlighted the recovery and expansion of consumption. According to Hainan Provincial Bureau of International Economic Development, one of the organizers of the trade event, the expo will focus on optimizing consumption, supply, and improving consumer confidence.
This year, we aim to use this Hainan Expo as a major platform to encourage the imports of high-quality products from foreign markets, and we also would hold many events during the Hainan Expo to help people, to encourage people to buy more high-quality products.
Over 100 events will be held, including forums, promotional events, and matchmaking sessions. More than 300 brands will launch over 1,000 new products. To provide exhibitors with potential buyers, organizers have released an exhibitor list and collected buyers' needs in advance.
Exposé, as the construction of the Hainan Free Trade Port enters its fifth year, the expo is expected to introduce more cooperation opportunities for the tropical island, advance high standard opening up, and share China's massive market opportunities with the world.
That was Tang Bo reporting from Haikou. For more, we're joined by Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow with Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Thank you, Dr. Zhou, for joining us again.
Okay.
Now, Doctor, you are at the expo, right? Tell us how it feels to be back at such a big event after 3 years of pandemic control measures in China.
I just arrived at the expo this noon, so I felt that there are a lot of changes. Like in the airport, we see so many people are coming here from all around the world, not only China. So I can see that different persons, like for the consumers and also the exhibitors, they come here to attend this expo. So they believe that it is a really big event for them. And actually that is also, we heard from some data that there are more exhibitors who want to come here to attend this conference. And in the conference, in the expo itself, you can find that there are more people there, without the face masks. So it's much easier for the people to communicate with each other, and it has a very big improve on the exhibitions, especially for the big companies from different countries.
Now, Doctor, so what's your mission at the expo? What special themes or topics or events are you looking into?
Actually, that when we're talking about the differences, we see that more innovation are expected here in Hainan because that we are just past the phase that everybody want to communicate more with other countries, and the foreign companies, they also want to attend the opportunities here in China. So I think that there are more forums. Actually, I will attend a forum to discuss about not only of the things of Hainan itself, but also about the relationship between Hainan and other countries, like for the RCEP. So we know that those agreements are creating better environment for the Hainan's development and also for the development of the consumption in the mainland China. So actually that people are trying to expect for better things, better thoughts, not only on some products, but also on the services, on the integration of different kind of things.
Now, Doctor, you said you're going to talk at a forum explaining Hainan's interactions with, in an international community. So can you tell us more what Hainan's role is in China's opening up to the world these days?
Actually, Hainan is a kind of experiment place that we are trying to integrate or trying to combine different resources in the region. It is the first free trade port in China, and we are not only want to improve the consumption, but also many other things, like to welcome the investors from other countries to be here. So when we're talking about that role, I think that Hainan is a very important pioneer in China to open to the other countries, and they want to experiment something like for the agricultures, like for aeronautics, and also many other high technology things. So in this regard, I do believe that Hainan is very promising, that we can input more resources, trying to inject more resources, and there are so many people coming here to consume, not only from the mainland, but also from other countries. So I think that kind of things can create better room for the innovation, because we need more innovation to reach our goal of the high-quality development.
1 minute before we wrap up, Doctor. Italy is the country of honor at this year's Consumer Expo. What can Italian business look into at China's consumer market today?
Yes, we can find that many Italian companies coming here, most of the things on the makeups, on the different kinds of clothes, or the costumes. So I believe that they will be bringing more, the ideas about what is fashion. And I think that many Chinese designers want to get more inspiration from them. So actually, we know that Italy is a very leading country in the clothing and the fashion industries. So I believe that they want to not only trying to dig out what is nowadays existing in China's market, but also trying to lead that, to inspire that, to fit for the fashion of the world.
Thank you. That was Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow with Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, joining us from Haikou in Hainan Province. You're listening to World Today. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Einar Tangen, a political and economic analyst and fellow at the independent Taihe Institute. World Today is news without the hype and business commentary that is informed and up to date, presenting the facts and asking incisive questions. So, join us if you are someone who needs to know what is happening in China as it is happening.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Liu Kun in Beijing. Well, the first batch of registration-based IPOs of 10 companies was adopted on Monday on the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges. This is a landmark for China's capital market reform. Some shares among the first batch of stocks even tripled in their debut on the day. The move signifies that China has formally applied the registration-based IPO system across the board. For more on this, our reporter Zhao Yang spoke with Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at Nova Arcade Technologies.
So thank you, Jiahe. The first 10 registration-based IPOs traded on Monday at the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges, marking the formal implementation of China's IPO reform. Tell us, what's the market response?
Well, the market response has been very good this morning. We were expecting the market would be flat or even a bit weak because we got 10 new stocks going on IPO on the same day, which means the market liquidity will be spread over these 10 stocks. But the result turns out to be that all these companies rose up significantly, and some of their price even doubled compared with their IPO price. So this is actually quite surprising. I mean, I don't think the market has expected the stock prices to be performing so good like this.
And help us understand why this reform has milestone significance, and in what way will it change China's capital market?
Well, when we look at China's IPO system, it has been going on for over 3 decades, starting from early 1990s. At that time, I mean, if you look back 2 or 3 decades ago, the market was quite unmatured compared with today. So at that time, the IPO was kind of not what we call registration-based today. It was kind of approval-based. That is, the professionals in the regulatory committee, they have to approve the IPO to help the unmatured investors picking the good companies. But, I mean, after 3 decades development, now it is believed that Chinese investors are now matured enough to make the selections themselves. So this really is the milestone that you see this market has been shifting and changed over 3 decades' time.
And what are the main takeaways from those new rules, and what changes is actually taking place?
Well, we have seen many changes taking place. The system about which company can get listed and which cannot is now completely different compared with before. The pricing will be determined by the market rather than government regulatory committees. All these trading rules have been different. The stocks can go up or downward without limits, even on the first trading day. Well, in the previous system, they have limits. I mean, they have like 10% limits. They have 22 times P ratio limits on their valuation. But now these limits have been removed. So that means as long as the market decides that it is worthwhile the price, then the IPO can go on.
And the equity market is very important as part of the country's financial system, and the reform of this IPO system make it more market-oriented, can bring more efficiency to the equity market. So what does this mean for business and investors, do you think?
That's right. As you mentioned, it brings more efficiency to the market. Everything becomes more market-oriented. So this is something really helps with the improvement of the efficiency of the market. I mean, if you look at the past four decades of China, I mean, the economy has been growing because we brought market system to the economy, that everything is determined by the market. So this is finally moving to the equity market, that everything is now market oriented. So when you talk about this, its implication for businesses and investors, that actually means businesses and investors have to perform their best. I mean, businesses have to do their best to attract the money. Investors like me, we have to do our best to determine which business is worthwhile of our money and which is not. So there will be a lot of jobs for both sides to do.
And the mechanism has been tested on Stock Board of Shanghai and also the Chinex market of Shenzhen bourses for a while. So, Jiahe, what's your observation? Do you think there will be a smooth transition on the main board?
That's right. I mean, this new system, this new market-oriented system, has already been tested for quite a while, I mean, a few years on Star Board as well as the Chinex board. These two boards actually have much less investors compared with the main board. So that's why they've been taken as a test. I mean, if you look at the opening requirement of Star Board, that requires that you have 500,000 RMB to be capable to open investment quality for that board. And Chinex board requires 200,000 yuan. Well, in the main board, the average holding of investors would be somewhere around 200,000. So that means you have much less than the professional investors over there on Star Board and Chinex board compared with the main board. But as this has been tested for like 2 or 3 years on these two markets, which has actually been proved as not having much problem at all. So it is now brought to the main board for the many investors, well, actually all the investors in this market.
And China's stock market rebounded this year, from last year's losses as investors are betting on China's growth momentum. So, Jiahe, do you think this IPO reform, the latest move, will boost investors' confidence, or do you think it will increase the speculation in the market?
Well, if you look at this, I think it will encourage the investment to big companies. I mean, people will start to realize that this market is now without restrictions. I mean, any company can come in and any company can get delisted. If you look at the other side of the IPO, the delisting procedure has also been improved. So that means if you look at good companies in this market, they become more rare. So I think higher valuation should be given to them because they are really rare in the economy. They return you like 20% per year. They're good targets. But if you look at other companies, the companies who are much weaker compared with the very leading ones, for example, the return on equity is only 5% per year, then that means if they had they had been overvaluated before, then their valuation might drop, because nowadays if you give them a very high valuation, then any other company that is not in the market can actually jump in and do their IPO because there is much less restriction nowadays.
And how much do you think will the IPO reform help companies get more financing?
Well, for the good companies, they will find it much easier to get the financing. I mean, they don't have limit. Well, for example, this time the limitation of their valuation for IPO has been removed. Previously, it was 22 times P/E ratio. For every single company, it's 22 times P/E ratio. But nowadays, if people like a company, they can give you 30, 40, or even 50. So it's much easier for these companies to get financing. But on the other side, if the valuation is low, if the valuation is given low by the market, if the earning is weak, then it will be harder for them to get the money. But if you look at the overall picture, because this reform has actually increased the efficiency of the overall market, that means we will have a better economy and a better stock market. That means for everyone taken as a whole, it will be easier to get financing because you have better economy nowadays.
And according to China International Capital Corporation, about 300 to 400 billion yuan in overseas capital is expected to flow into the Asian market this year. So, Jiahe, what do you make of it? And why do they have confidence in the Chinese markets?
Well, I think they should have confidence. I mean, look at that. China is now almost taking 20% of the world GDP. China is stable. China has a very stable government, very stable central bank. So this is a stable market. It's taking about 1/5 of the world economy, and it is still growing. I mean, if you look at the per capita GDP, we're only like $13,000 US. So that's a pretty low level. If you expect the China's per capita GDP to reach like 40,000, which is not a very high level in the world today, that means there will be 3 times increase for the per capita GDP in China. So look at that. I mean, also, if you think that many foreign capital have not been fully investing in China before, so there will be a lot of things for them to grab in this market. I mean, I really think the main investment funds in the world should really put their focus to China, at least to take it to 20% as China's GDP share in the world.
That was Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at Novant K Technologies. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of World Today. A quick recap of the headlines. China's first domestically built aircraft carrier joins a Pilale military drill in the Taiwan Straits and around the Taiwan island for the first time. U.S. government officials scramble to identify sources of highly classified intel leak. Saudi Arabia and Houthi officials advance talks over long-term ceasefire. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, download our podcast by searching World Today. For further discussions, follow us on Twitter at Cgtn Radio. I'm Liu Kun in Beijing. Thank you for staying with us. Bye for now.